She thought she was paying for a stranger's company for one night. But when she opened the door and saw the face of the billionaire CEO she had insulted in public just a week ago, her heart stopped. She didn't know if he was here for revenge, or something far more dangerous. What happened next would change both of their lives forever. Stay until the end, and if you love shocking twists and heart-stopping drama, hit that subscribe button now, so you never miss the next story. Isabella Hart had never thought she'd be the kind of woman to do this, to scroll through a discreet, high-end escort service website, her finger hesitating over the Book Now button as rain hammered against her apartment window like the universe warning her not to. But after the week she'd had, getting fired from her job at an events company after calling out a wealthy client for his arrogance, missing her rent payment, and watching her ex flaunt his new girlfriend all over social media, she felt like she needed to reclaim some control, even if it meant doing something reckless. It wasn't about love, and it wasn't about lust. It was about distraction, about not feeling the crushing loneliness that seemed to creep into every corner of her life lately. She picked the most expensive option, not because she could afford it, but because her credit card limit still had room, and selected one night. Full discretion. The profile photo was blurred, the bio vague but promising exclusive companionship for sophisticated women. She told herself it was just a business transaction, just one night. She spent an hour getting ready, curling her chestnut hair, until it framed her face in soft waves, slipping into the navy silk dress she'd been saving for an occasion that never came, applying lipstick that made her feel braver than she was. When the knock finally came, her heart jumped into her throat. She smoothed her dress, steadied her breath, and opened the door, only to freeze. Standing there, framed in the dim hallway light, was Alexander Drake, billionaire CEO of Drake International, the man whose empire touched everything from luxury hotels to media conglomerates. The man she had accidentally humiliated last week at a charity gala after overhearing him mock a struggling employee and calling him out in front of an audience of socialites. She had expected a stranger, maybe even someone awkward trying to play a role. Instead, she was staring into the piercing steel blue eyes of a man whose face had been on the cover of Forbes, a man who was supposed to be untouchable. "You?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her own heart. His lips curved into a slow, knowing smirk. "Miss Hart," he said in a voice smooth as velvet and just as dangerous. "Shall we begin?" He stepped past her into the apartment without waiting for an invitation, and she could smell his cologne, expensive, sharp, and intoxicating. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that something else was happening here, but she couldn't speak. She closed the door and turned to find him standing in her living room, casually loosening his tie, as if he owned the place. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "I could ask you the same thing," he replied. "But let's just say, I was intrigued by your booking. When I saw your name, I decided to take the job myself." She blinked, unsure if he was joking. Billionaires didn't moonlight as escorts. This had to be some kind of trap, some elaborate payback. Yet his eyes held no malice, just an unnerving mix of curiosity and control. "You can ask me to leave," he said finally, his tone teasing, "but something tells me you won't." Dinner was his idea, not in some dimly lit restaurant, but in her own apartment, where he pulled out ingredients from a sleek black duffel bag, as if this were all part of the service. He cooked effortlessly, searing salmon in a pan while recounting half-finished stories that hinted at a world she'd never touched, private islands, hostile boardroom takeovers, dinners with presidents. But every time she asked why he was really there, his answer danced just out of reach. "Maybe I'm bored," he'd say. Or, "Maybe I like to see what happens when people drop their guard." She tried to match him, sipping wine and leaning back in her chair like she wasn't secretly terrified. And yet, under that terror, something else flickered attraction, dangerous and electric. They talked for hours, The kind of conversation that loops from politics to childhood dreams, to the music you'd want played at your funeral. She laughed more than she expected, even forgetting at moments who he was, until his phone lit up with a news alert about a major acquisition his company had just made. That's when the cracks began to show. "You closed $1 billion deal tonight?" she asked. "And you're here?" He met her gaze without flinching. "I'm exactly where I want to be." There was a weight in those words she didn't understand yet. As the night deepened, the tone shifted. He began asking questions, pointed ones about her finances, her family, her ambitions. It was like being undressed layer by layer without him touching her. "Why did you book an escort, Isabella?" he asked finally, his voice low. She swallowed hard. "Because I wanted to feel wanted," she admitted. He didn't laugh or mock her. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "You're worth more than you think," he said. The air between them felt charged, as if any movement would shatter something fragile. She expected him to kiss her, but instead he stood and held out his hand. "Dance with me." There was no music, just the soft hum of the refrigerator, but she let him pull her close. His hand rested at the small of her back, his other holding hers firmly. They moved slowly, deliberately, and she became acutely aware of his heartbeat against her chest. For a moment, she let herself believe this was real. But then, just before midnight, he whispered something that turned her blood cold. To tomorrow morning, your life will be very different, The sun had barely risen when she woke to the smell of coffee and the sight of him still in her kitchen, scrolling through his phone. "Morning," he said casually, as if they'd been doing this for years. She sat up, the events of the night before replaying in her mind like a fever dream. "What did you mean last night?" she asked. He set down his phone and walked over, handing her a steaming mug. "I meant that you've been on my radar for longer than you think." Her stomach tightened. "Why?" His eyes softened in a way that almost unnerved her more than his smirk. "Because you're the only person who's ever spoken to me like I was human. At that gala, when you called me out, you weren't afraid. Everyone else in my world is." She didn't know what to say, so he continued. "I wanted to see who you really were. So when I saw your booking, I took it. I wanted one night to decide if I was right about you." "And?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled faintly. "You're more than right. Which is why I've already made some calls this morning." She frowned. "Calls?" He handed her an envelope. Inside was a contract, a job offer at one of his companies, with a salary that made her eyes widen. "You can take it or leave it," he said. "But I'd prefer if you took it. And dinner with me tonight." It felt surreal, like a fairy tale rewritten in modern ink. She should have been suspicious, maybe even afraid, but instead, she felt a strange sense of possibility. Still, she couldn't help but ask, "Why me? You could have anyone." His answer was simple. "Because you weren't for sale. Last night, you were lonely, not desperate, and I think you're worth betting on." She stared at him, wondering if she'd stepped into a trap or been handed a golden key. Maybe both. "So," he said, leaning in close, "is it a yes?" Her heart pounded. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she wasn't ready to walk away. "Yes," she breathed. And just like that, the man she thought she'd hired for one night became the start of a story she could never have imagined.